All right, we are live now. Hello, everyone. Hi, how are you? And welcome. This is Sharif from Advanced Media. And today we are having Jonny from Red Cinema Cameras. And we will talk about Red, why is Red, and we'll talk in details. And then we'll get some Q&A in the end. So welcome, Jonny.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Really looking forward to being here today. Obviously, with the world in lockdown, everyone's taken to streaming, and it's a perfect opportunity to be there in spirit, although I can't actually be in Dubai, to talk about some cool red things and at the end have a bit of a Q&A.
yeah, exactly. So we'll just wait for a couple of minutes to
Yeah,
more
not a
audience to
problem.
get.
Not a problem.
Uh, so if you'd like just to introduce yourself, and then we'll get
Yeah,
to the
sure.
point.
So I've got a little slide that I'll just bring up just for a bit of context. I am showing my screen. So here we go. So prior to joining Red, so I've only been with Red for going almost a year now, about 8 months. So prior to joining Red, I was working as a digital imaging technician. So kind of started off as a DIT trainee, learning the ropes, running around on set, cable wrangling, all those kind of things. And slowly over the course of a couple of years, transitioned into fully working DIT in the industry, kind of got a couple of lists of some of the shows I worked on as a DIT assistant in the digital lab or as a DIT. And Dark Crystal was really the one where I kind of got really close and working with Red, and that show was all shot on Red,
Yeah,
shot on Dragon Vista Vision. And then from that process, I started discussing with Red about opportunities, and I decided to make the transition from working on set to be able to fulfill my technological love and work for a cinema camera manufacturer.
yeah,
So it's
great.
been a really cool journey of having that on-set experience and understanding how our customers like to work and all those kind of things, and appreciating what it's like working on set with these cameras. So I feel like it's quite a nice perspective that I can at least relate to a lot of people who are shooting films.
Yeah, great. Uh, so we've got a couple of people. So yeah, we can just start a little bit about the presentation, and then we'll get the Q&A in the end.
Okay, awesome. So basically today, what I kind of wanted to show is a short overview of kind of everything that is good to know about Red, basically. So we're going to kind of look at the camera and sensor ecosystem. We're going to look at Redcode RAW and IPP2, two things which really define Red cameras really well. Redcode RAW is crazy powerful in what it allows us to do. And just talk about some of the crazy situations our cameras have been thrust into, from crazy hot situations to freezing cold, and some of the high-end productions trusting Red.
Yeah,
So one thing I just want to start off with is kind of the thought process of choosing the Red body and the system that you're going to work with. And it's kind of broken down into thinking about the body and then the sensor, kind of how you would look at film stock. You would have your film stock, you would choose that film stock, and then choose the body that goes into either your Panavision XL, your Millennium XL, big old body, or maybe a slightly smaller Penelope Arton, those kind of things, where you choose the system that works right for the job.
yeah,
So obviously we're very well known for DSMC2. That's our fully modular system. Configure it any way that you want. It can be run and gun gimbal, or you can build it up to be a full kind of studio camera. And I'm pretty sure loads of people are very familiar with that
yeah,
system. And obviously being able to choose the sensor in the same body, DSMC2 unified the whole lineup. So the only thing that's really changing is the sensor and a board behind the sensor. So everything internally, you get the same options, the same frame rates at all resolutions. You've got same ProRes recordings, which used to be slightly different. So it's really easy to move between the sensors.
yeah,
And where things started to change for Red is with the Ranger. So we've never done an all-in-one body before. And that's something that everyone was basically asking us for. They wanted a system that has everything they need in one easy to work with body. So we worked very closely with rental houses to kind of figure out what that system would be. And as a result, that's where Ranger came in. So it firstly started off as a rental only camera. And last year at IBC, we announced that the general public can come in and purchase these cameras. And it's basically add the lens, add a battery, add some media, and you can start recording. It's meant to be a robust, really simple and reliable system that can complement DSMC2 really well. So you could have a Ranger as your A camera, as your studio setup, and a DSMC2 as your run and gun option, because you can choose the same sensors between them. And what are those sensors? So we've got the Monstro sensor, we've got the Helium sensor, and the Gemini sensor. Now, just because of time, I'm not going to dive into the individual nuances of each sensor. Maybe we can do a follow-up if lots of people are interested in learning about each different sensor. But you can basically choose whatever DSMC2 sensor you want in a Ranger body. So what are some of the benefits that you're going to be getting from working with a Ranger? I think most importantly, especially out there in the Middle East, is going to be thermal performance. You know, cameras in the middle of the desert when you're shooting outside, they can get very hot. And DSMC2 is a really small, compact system. And you've got two fans trying to get airflow through that system. So on Ranger, because we've got that larger body, we've basically redesigned it to have a larger thermal transfer chamber. So we've got a huge fan that can basically move more air quicker through the body, and also as a result slower, but still get the same air through and make the camera a lot quieter. There's a big old heat sink down in the bottom as well, just to get heat away from that sensor to ultimately have the camera operate at higher temperatures for longer. It's going to retain its black balance very well, and it's not going to shift from the calibration settings you've set for it. So that's probably one of the biggest things for me, because I've been in a lot of situations where we're shooting in really hot environments, and Ranger is really going to change the game for a lot of those kind of situations. I'll kind of breeze through these next ones. 24-volt power, anything from 11.5 volts to 32 volts. So really great in terms of being able to power from different power sources. And also, as a result, we've got a bigger pipe. You can kind of think of it, we can get more power into the system, so we can power more accessories. And as a result, we've got about 14 amps to play with, as opposed to 9 amps on DSMC2. The obvious one is integrated I/O. We've got 3 SDI outputs, 2 mirrored and 1 independent. So you can have your log feed going off to your DIT and a LUTed Rec 709 going off to Video Village or something like that. We've got multiple 24-volt and 12-volt outputs. So you can power your wireless follow focus, your Teradek, your rangefinder, and all those kind of things really nicely positioned all over the camera. Got a few P taps as well. We've got USB, so you can pretty much power any accessory you want to have on this camera. We've got integrated XLR. We only opted for one because this was designed alongside rentals for kind of production use. Commonly, you'll be recording audio externally, but by having one 5-pin XLR, you've got stereo inputs, so it's super easy to be able to get any audio that you wish to have in there for if you're doing a documentary style setup. And then the standard, we've got Gen-lock time coding control ports. So it's really a camera geared and ready to go for any production, you know. Typically, when you're configuring a DSMC2, maybe when you're bouncing between rental houses, it's what module have I got on this camera? Oh, this rental house has a different module. I've got to get this cable now and this set of cables. With Ranger, whenever you hire that camera, you know exactly what you've got in the body, and it's super easy to set up. And it speeds up that prep process because you've only got a limited amount of time when you're prepping a camera. This just makes it a little bit easier. Awesome. The big one for rental houses is the next one is the shimmed mount. So on DSMC2, you've got an adjustable back focus plane, so you can move it yourself and move the sensor away from the lens to get that back focus nailed. Whereas on Ranger, now it's a fixed sensor. Again, we're kind of going for that ease of use and reliability kind of aspect to it, and you put shims into the mount. So this is great because you can shim your lenses once, and you know for the entire production that your back focus is going to stay solid. So for rentals, that's a huge bonus. And then finally, we've just got the integrated sidekick. So you can still operate full menu functions through the camera and not have to be getting in the way of the DP when he's hogging that monitor, trying to frame up a shot. So that's really great. You've got your preset buttons. You can do everything you can through the touchscreen through this side screen. And the final thing there is you've got the improved Wi-Fi. So on DSMC2, the antennas for camera control, not for picture, are internally, whereas on Ranger now it's external, so it's a lot more robust and you can get a wider connection field, basically. And that kind of sums up Ranger, really. And it kind of leads me on to the choose the sensor for the body and the job. You know, there's almost no perfect sensor that covers everything, you know, in terms of with Red. You know, we've got Vista Vision when you want to go large format and get those unique image characteristics, but maybe you love some S35 lenses but still want to shoot 8K. Helium's perfect for that.
Yeah.
And then you've got Gemini, where maybe you're running and gunning and you want a sensor that's got slightly easier on the data management costs, but it's got the benefit of this dual ISO, and you can go anywhere and get really great low light capabilities. So I kind of want people to be thinking of it as, you know what, this commercial I'm doing, it's run and gun, I'm going to go Gemini sensor. But then maybe they do a feature film and go, oh, you know what, actually, now I've got the budget, I'm going to go Monstro and go large format. You know, there's not one sensor that you need to stick with. You really can bounce between all of them, which I think is really unique. So that kind of summarizes a very quick technological update there in terms of the bodies, for those of you not familiar with it. I'm now just going to touch on why 8K. You know, I get a lot of questions, as I'm sure AMT do as well, about why should I be shooting 8K? I've just bought a 4K TV. What's all this stuff about 8K? What am I really getting from this higher resolution? And to start off, obviously, we've got two cameras. We've been shooting 8K since 2015. We've got the Monstro sensor. This is your cinematic VistaVision camera, which gives you access to this lovely array of large format lenses. I've got a set of Supreme primes with me now, and I absolutely love working with them, giving me that amazing depth of field control and just that field of view from that huge sensor. And as a result of that huger sensor, we've got larger photo sites. You know, we've got 8K, we've got 35 million pixels spread out over a larger area. And as a result of those larger pixels, we've got really improved dynamic range and shadow detail. It's a fantastic low light camera. You know, that doesn't quite get as close to Gemini levels, but that just shows how good the pixels are in this. It's not all about how large the photo sites are. It's about how good and the quality and the tech behind those pixels. Yes. And one thing, just to finish up with Monstro, is you still can shoot S35. When you crop down into 6K mode, that's the same size or about 2% larger than helium. So you can really have a two-in-one camera. You can be shooting with your large format lenses, and then you fancy using some lovely Cooke S2s. You can put those on and still be shooting high resolution 6K. Yeah. Now moves us on to helium. More of the same, obviously. Still 8K chip, still looks absolutely amazing. You've got that S35 coverage, so great for those of you that have got an existing arsenal of lenses. Wildlife guys love it, and it's the most popular Netflix streaming camera. You know, I think last year, out of the top 40 shows, 21 or 23 were shot on Red, and then I think 11 or 12 of those were on the helium sensor. So hugely popular, and I'll show some of the recent Netflix productions at the end there. I think the kind of thing to think about here is just, you know, what else can an 8K sensor give me? And it's 35 megapixels. You know, that's a huge amount of resolution. You know, a lot of people think, hey, 8K is only twice that of 4K. Lots of international connections going on here. Yeah. So what I was kind of saying is that 8K is 4 times that of 4K. We've got 35 million pixels to be able to choose what to do with those photo sites, giving us creative control. So what are some of those benefits? The first, and I think the most obvious one, is the ability to reframe. Being able to be a run and gun filmmaker, and you can get multiple shots for the price of one. You know, for example, in this shot here, we've got a lovely wide shot of this Komodo dragon on like a 200 mil or something, and we haven't quite got the legs to get in for that beautiful close-up. Or maybe it's not safe enough for us to get that close to this kind of Komodo dragon because they can get quite angry. So by having basically 4 4K windows, we've got this beautiful second image that we can move around and crop into. Just looking at some of the inherent benefits of 8K compared to a 4K or HD signal, we're looking here at this wide open vista. You know, at HD, at this little square down here, we can't even really see what's going on over there at HD. At 4K, we're starting to get some sense of perspective and scale, but at 8K, the differences are obvious there. 4K to 8K, we're seeing a lot more detail and clarity in the image. We're getting a sense of depth as well. That's one thing that I think isn't always discussed. We're really seeing that there's this ridge, and then we've got some shrubberies just before that, and then there's a sense of scale. It doesn't feel so two-dimensional. One thing as well is more roundness. You know, that's one of the things that, you know, resolution isn't sharpness. It's resolving images and giving our eyes a better idea of what's going on there. You know, zooming in here on this lizard, when we're looking at the eye at HD, we're getting this laddering. Sorry. Yeah. That's quite common with HD. We're not quite seeing those smooth transitions between the eye. And at 8K, we're getting the sense of those ridges on the eye itself. You know, I've got another slide here. The circle on the right is sharp, but it's not highly resolved. We're trying to make circular things with square pixels. How are we going to make things seem more organic? Well, we need more of them. There's some other things here showing, hey, if we're looking at some beautiful skin tone, skin isn't one uniform color. There's lots of different imperfections and different changes. We go from pinks to greens to blues, different shades, reds are in there. And if you've only kind of got the equivalent of a couple of pixels covering that area of skin, it's going to kind of blend together. Whereas at 8K, say you've got some beautiful makeup, say you've got prosthetics on there, and you want to see this beautiful transition in the skin and to have it represented very naturally, having that many pixels is only going to be beneficial to us from a creative standpoint. Why restrict yourself? Give yourself more information to work with that you can choose what to do with later.
Yeah, right.
Just to finish up with a bit of an example of what it means to be able to crop in. Lots of productions have the budget for multiple cameras, but sometimes maybe you haven't got the money to hire in multiple cameras. This is one of those situations where we're doing a 2-shot inside a car. We can't afford to get multiple cameras rigged on there. We can shoot our 8K wide and punch in for 2 4K close-ups on those. And the benefit is that we haven't then got to shoot the whole scene again with a tighter lens because the performance might be different. We can ensure we get the best performances from every angle. I'm not saying you should always be shooting like this. It's just a great alternative for when you're in a pinch. Red isn't only about resolution. There's so much more to the image that is vital. When you're making a cake, eggs aren't the only thing you need. You need everything else to bring a well-rounded image, and that's what we're going to look at today as well.
Yeah, right.
So, some other things. So a lot of people say to me, "Hey, I don't want to be cropping in on my image. Cropping in isn't something I'm interested in. I want to frame it, and that's what I want to go to my editors." So I'm delivering for Netflix. I'm delivering for YouTube. That's 4K. Surely I should only shoot 4K. Well, no, you can actually benefit from 8K today by the process of super sampling, or commonly known as downsampling. By the process of using various algorithms, take all of that data, all of those pixels, and bring it down into a different deliverable. Yeah. So 2K or 4K. Yeah. As a result, we get improved clarity, we get better detail, better textures, smoothness, and even our noise floor changes. So we're taking our pixel of noise at 8K, and through the process of downsampling, we're taking those pixels and not literally, but metaphorically, reducing the size of those. And as a result, our noise floor actually changes. And I've got a short clip here, which at the very end, which you can view on red.com. I'll just show you here. So you can see we've got 2K zoomed into 300%, which has been upscaled to 4K. We've got a native 4K camera at 4K, and then we've got 8K downsampled to 4K. Now at 2K, upscaled to 4K, it's really starting to fall down. We're not seeing any detail in the tattoo there. We can't see any individual hairs. We've got quite a bit of noise here in the shadows. I know we're streaming. Obviously, it's quite hard to spot there. But if you actually head over to red.com, and if you go onto the Power of Red section and you just scroll down, there is a really great overview of the differences between 2K and all the way up to 8K downscaled. So you can really see a good quality image there. So let's just jump back into this presentation. I'll skip across to the end. There we go. So at 4K, we're starting to see some of that detail. We're starting to get a sense that actually this guy's got a fresh tattoo. But at 8K, we can really get a sense of the depth on the tattoo. We can see that actually it's a really fresh tattoo. Now, from a narrative perspective, this could be very important because, say, we're doing a murder mystery, and this is something that's caught, trying to catch the audience eye to say, hey, watch out, this guy's got a fresh tattoo. That's going to come in useful later. At 2K, the audience isn't going to get that. They're just going to see this blurry mess on his arm. But at 8K, we're really getting those details, which is why I think it's really important today. You can benefit from a nicer image while also future-proofing yourself. So just like with film, they shot it, they scanned it at the best quality they could. And as film scanning got better, they were able to re-deliver and make more money off that deliverable. So what we can do is, although we can't rescan it per se, as we're delivering for 4K today, we can make money on that 4K deliverable. In a year or even 2 years' time, when 8K TVs are more prevalent, we can just re-export to 8K and start selling 8K content natively, where everyone else is going to have to start upscaling. Awesome. So you are really future-proofing yourself. You know, we're going to have a huge backlog of stuff. You know, we've been shooting 8K since 2015. So stuff shot in 2015, when 8K comes around, is still going to look as amazing as it was at 4K, which is really exciting. Right. I think now we'll kind of go on to RAW and IPP2, two of the really big things for Red that I think really set us apart and really complete the package. You know, it's resolution, it's Redcode, and it's RAW. Those are the things that are really exciting. So what is RAW? I think many of your followers will be familiar with the concept of RAW, obviously with stills photography, basically RAW or go home in terms of photography. It's giving us the maximum amount of flexibility in post. You know, it's retaining all of that data. We're not throwing anything away, and that's great because we're having a really thick digital negative to work with in post. Also, what's great is they're tunable. So it's a compressed RAW, which I know doesn't typically go together. RAW is typically associated with being uncompressed. Redcode RAW is unique because you can choose the file sizes depending on the production and your data storage requirements. So you can retain the ability to make all those great changes in post and ultimately craft a unique look. That's the thing that we really love seeing in post. When people take these 16-bit files from a camera into post, that's where crafting this unique look really starts to come, and where Red really comes into its stride when we get into post. You know, some of the examples. So let's say the image on the left, we shot it at ISO 800 at the time. Our hands were freezing. We were outside and we had to spin around and get this shot. You know, the sun was perfect. It was going down. We had no time to come in and change our ISO. But because we know it's all in metadata, things like ISO aren't burnt in, as long as we're not clipping, we can come in and change that ISO in post. So we've gone from ISO 800 to 250 completely in post, as if we were there when we shot the shot. And how this is working is you can kind of think of it as other sensors, light is coming in, hitting the sensor, and then some processing happenings occur. We have our amplification, so our ISO, and then the image is saved. So effectively, you're burning in the ISO. But with Redcode RAW, the light's coming in, and we're saving that raw data. So that data that's hit the sensor has been saved, and the amplification is happening after. So we've got complete control over the amplification, providing there's data there in terms of highlights and shadows. Also, from a creative standpoint, white balance, tint, and we can also control how our highlights and contrast are being handled within the image. So in this shot here, we shot at 800 ISO, 3:2 white balance, and we had a medium highlight roll off. We were choosing how our highlights are being rolled off. But then we've come into post, we've decided, hey, actually, I want a really filmic highlight roll off. We've changed it to a very soft, and we've actually boosted it and cooled it off a little bit by adjusting the white balance and the tint, and really easily, without degrading the image, it's not permanent. We've started to bring out this really unique look from the image. You know, but not all RAW is the same. You know, how raw is your RAW is what I like to speak to a lot of people about. You know, Redcode RAW is a 16-bit RAW container, and that's the container that has all the colors that the camera can capture. You know, compared to 8-bit, we're going to start to see some of this banding and posterization, you know, where there isn't enough colors to represent the scene that's in front of it. You know, there's a crazy amount of colors in nature. And, you know, even in a sunset, those transitions from blue to yellow, you know, the image just starts to fall apart. And just in comparison in terms of numbers, 16-bit, 65,000 tones per channel, compared to 8-bit, only 256, 12-bit, 4,000 tones per channel. Why restrict yourself from a creative standpoint when you can have all of this information to work with and really bring out the details that you want to in an image? You know, and just to finish up with talking about RAW, the thing that always comes up is, how am I going to be working with this compressed RAW? Because one of the steps of working with any compressed format is you have to uncompress it. Like when someone sends you a zip file over the internet, you've got to double click on it, you've got to extract it and then work with that file. That's the process of what's happening in real time. It's unpacking that file, debayering it, and then ultimately playing it back on your screen. And typically, that was quite a hard process. You know, it was done by the computer's CPU. That was doing our decompression. But through working with NVIDIA, working with CUDA, we've been able to take that decompression, move it off onto the GPU. And as a result, we've got a brief example here of when we're working with the CPU to play back Redcode raw footage, the CPU is being pegged at 100%. But when the GPU comes in and picks up that legwork, the CPU drops down and we get real-time playback. In a session we did on the Red YouTube channel, we actually were playing 8K raw in real time in full res on a laptop. That's kind of how great this technology is. And in terms of where you can get that, you can get it on Windows through CUDA, and you can now get it through Metal on Mac OS. So Resolve just released the latest version that has support for Metal. So those of you working on Mac Pros or MacBooks, you can start to see some of those improvements depending on the system configuration that you have. We'll now bleed into IPP2. So IPP2 is the color pipeline and ultimately the process of delivering that 16-bit raw to a fantastic looking image. You know, we've constantly been evolving as the generations of camera have been going on, starting from Redcode, moving into Dragon Color, and now we've gone into IPP2, constantly innovating and making sure that the cameras look as good as they possibly can. We've got better management of challenging colors. We've got smoother highlight roll-off, more accurate midtones, so skin tones look beautiful, and it's more simpler and more intuitive, being built for HDR from the ground up with industry standard naming schemes. So this is kind of an overview of what's going on inside the camera. We've got that raw R3D image where we're saving that data. That's saved. Photons have hit the sensor. We've now saved it. And now everything else starts to happen. The demosaic, the highlight extension to bring back some detail in those highlights, conversion into red, white, gamma RGB. We then have our ISO gain. So see, the actual ISO amplification is kind of happening a little bit later in the process. We then convert out to log to prepare us for our creative aspect. We apply our CDL, our LUT, and any internal contrast or curves. And then we move to basically the final output stages. So our output tone map curve, our highlight roll off. If we're going to Rec 709 or HDR, that's where this process basically happens, and how we result in getting an image on our screen. You know, just to give a brief overview of how broad red, white, gamma RGB is, that's basically all the colors and different shades and tones that the sensor can basically see and capture. And you can see here, it's pretty wide. It's crazy how much we can really capture of the visible light spectrum. And what's even more awesome is that because every Red camera since the Red 1 has been raw, in post-production, you can take your Red 1 footage from 2007 and use this new IPP2, not internally, but in post, and get all of these benefits from the new demosaicing algorithm to the better highlight roll-off, the better retention of the details, and better management of challenging colors, which is amazing. Being able to take a camera from 2007 and use this new processing pipeline is amazing. It's then super easy to transfer out from log into any transform function you want. So BT1886, HDR 2084, Gamma 2.6 for cinema. It's really easy, just to click a button and now you're working in that output space. But what do some of these changes look like? So in Legacy, we can see in this image on the left-hand side, the neon light is coming off as a bit orange. Whereas on the right-hand side, we're now getting a really deep representation of that deep red. And as a result, our skin tones are now more accurate to as they were at the time. These are the kind of improvements we're working on. So I've got a few swipes I'm just going to show here. Look on the right-hand side. Look at this neon over here by this light. As I now play this clip, you can see that now it's a really deep organic red as the eye would have seen it. Yeah. Looking here at chromatic aberrations, where you get a really intense source of color. When we come through this, that chromatic aberration is now a lot more pleasing. And the final one that is always amazing to show, excuse me, we've got all of these disco lights from this massive party going on. And as a result, it's now beautiful. And this is all stuff that was shot on pre-IPP2 footage. These are clips that have been improved as a result of this new processing pipeline. Yeah. And just to give a quick overview of this is how it looks on the color spectrum. So we've gone from Dragon Color, we've now gone into Dragon Color 2, which had a really oversaturated blues. And now IPP2 has a really nice even distribution of all those colors and that 16-bit container we're working with. Some of the things that I talked about earlier was the contrast and the highlight roll-off. And that's the process of taking how the camera is handling the highlights, handling the white parts of the image, handling the dark parts of the image, and how it's processing those. We can do that either in camera or in post-production. So we can be one day shooting a noir film. Maybe we want really deep blacks, really bright highlights, windows are just full of white, and there's no detail we need to see in there. We can dial that in. We can do high contrast, a hard highlight roll off. But then maybe in post-production, or maybe on the next job we go to, we go, actually, let's go for a more soft and beauty style. We're doing a beauty commercial. We can have this really beautiful low contrast image with beautiful soft highlight roll off that are very filmic. And you can see a bit of an example of that here, of two images that through two settings look very, very different. And you can go onto red.com/R3D samples, and you can download any Redcode clips and see the changes for yourself of going from a soft to a hard highlight roll off. It's really amazing to be able to draw out that unique image. And finally, we'll kind of summarize with Redcode. So Redcode is what enables us to shoot high resolution images in a really easy contain format and small file sizes. Back in 2007, when the Red one came out, shooting uncompressed 4K would have been a monumental undertaking at the time, and as would uncompressed 8K today. A lot of people come to me and they say, hey, why can't I just shoot uncompressed 8K and go from there? Well, actually, uncompressed 8K is 5,098 megabytes a second, and that fill up our 480 gig card in 1 minute and 30 seconds, which is crazy. I don't think there's any producers that would be happy with that. and there's no director that can get everything in a 1 minute take. Yeah. So by using the compression method, wavelet compression in Redcode, we're able to get down to 259 megabytes a second and take up 32 minutes on that 480 gig card. And if we need a bit more time, maybe we're doing a documentary interview or some sort of a musical event, we can go to 8:1 and get 51 minutes on that same card because we can choose the compression in the image. So how does that stack up to the competition? Well, we've got down there the Alexa LF shooting 4.5K ARRI RAW at 501 megabytes a second. Huge amounts of data. Sony Venice 6K, 328 megabytes a second with their XOC and XT codec. Even ARRI's new Codex HDE, pretty heavy at around 300 megabytes a second. We can see 8K, 35 million pixels on the Helium and the Monstro at 6:1, only 216 megabytes, less than half that of some of the other codecs. And even as you start to go down a bit more, our 6K at 6:1, 122 megabytes a second. So you can shoot higher resolution images for a smaller data footprint and basically save money as a result. And this is a production that I did just before I joined Red. We shot around 1,300 hours, but I've rounded it down to keep it a bit easier. We shot over the course of about 11 months. And as a result, 8K 6:1 is about 660 terabytes. Had we have done that in some other codecs, 6.5K RAW would have been 2.6 petabytes. 4.5K on the LF with HDE, so their newer codec, around 1.1 petabytes. And on the Venice with XOC and ST, the most compressed version of Sony's codec, around 1 petabyte. So we're getting more resolution as a result and for smaller file sizes, which is crazy. And how does it work? So I'll just touch on this very briefly, as I don't want to get too technical. But it's basically looking at the data points and figuring out what data points can we get rid of to still rebuild the same image. It's a visually lossless codec. So we're not going to have this blocking that we get from JPEG. It's wavelet. So as a result, very high frequency edges get a little bit softer. And I've got an example I can show of that. So basically with these lines going on here, this is basically a signal coming into the camera. And as we start to add data points, we can create a wave, so wavelet. And you can see that the wave isn't actually any different on the final 3 images. So the bottom one would be uncompressed. Then we've got 2:1 and then maybe 5:1 compression, where that wave isn't getting any smoother. We're still rebuilding the exact same image. And obviously, this wave is very consistent. It's a very basic image. Most images, they'll be going crazy all over the place because there's so much detail and high frequency edges all over the place. But where would you choose different compressions for, surely you would just always shoot the least compressed? Well, actually, no. There's a lot of people that I know that shoot 20-to-1 compression for YouTube. YouTube has its own compression. People are watching it on phones, and you're not going to see the very subtle nuances of different compression ratios. Again, if you search Red R3D sample files on Google and go onto our sample file page, there's some going to 13-to-1, 15-to-1 compression, and you can download those and really zoom in and see the detail and the quality in the image, and how 13-to-1 compression, those images are still beautiful. So the kind of points that I point out for a lot of people are, hey, the sweet spot is between 5 and 10-to-1. Big budgets are going for that 5-to-1 compression. They've got the money for the storage. But Netflix has approved 6 to 8-to-1. So that's kind of where you can work with for Netflix. So web TV around there. If you're doing an indie feature, a short film, 6 to 10-to-1 is going to be perfectly fine. And if you're doing any kind of web content, I would say you could easily get away with going up to something like 12-to-1. It's all about finding that balance of how much do I want storage-wise, and how important am I looking for quality. It's that thing of, if you're shooting uncompressed, it would be really, really unmanageable. But with Redcode RAW, you get all those benefits we talked about: high resolution sensor, we get that 16-bit RAW container for flexibility in post, all in a file size that you choose for your production.
Yeah.
And we'll just quickly wrap up with this little section on reliability. What are some of the places that our cameras have been thrust into? And one of the amazing ones I think is very relevant for out there in Dubai is Gabriel Mann. He works with the US Forest Service out there in California. And during the wildfire season, he goes out with them and shoots with them. And those are some crazy hot temperatures. Not saying that the fire is as hot as it would be out there in Dubai, although when I was out there last time, it felt like I was on fire. But, these are the kind of situations these cameras are being thrust into, and this is where Ranger is then an improvement on that. Having that improved cooling system and being thrust into these hot environments, these cameras are super robust. There's a video on our website. So if you go to red.com, there's a Power of Red section. If you tap on reliability, there's a full showcase of showing how he beats these cameras up, because he really goes hard in on these cameras and really getting in and amongst it. On the flip flop of that, we've then got Marcel, who shoots in some freezing cold temperatures. There's a really broad operating range where you can operate in really high intense environments and freezing cold environments. He was following these guys trekking throughout the wilderness in minus 40 degrees across 300 miles of Alaska's frozen truck roads. So these cameras are really, really flexible in these extreme situations. But I appreciate that not everyone... Oh, sorry about the sirens going off there in the background. What are some of the situations that production-wise these are being used? We've got Mindhunter, New Pope, Irishman, Stranger Things, Six Underground, Money Heist. The list really goes on and on there. Kingdom Season 2, that's absolutely amazing. These productions that are entrusting the reliability of a camera on their productions, because that's the most important thing. You can have a good-looking image, but if the camera's not reliable, it's all gone to waste. Yeah. These high-end productions, top-end directors are really entrusting with them. And I know you were talking earlier about a recent production out there in Dubai.
Actually, the one, Jenny, it was on Netflix. That one, it was shot on Red.
Nice. And that came out recently?
Yeah. Sorry?
And that came out recently?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I'll definitely give that a little look out later.
Yeah.
And that basically summarizes what I wanted to talk about. I know I kind of went through it somewhat quickly. It usually takes an hour and a half to get through that, but at least then it gives some perspective on kind of what's going on with Red and why you might want to consider it. Yeah. So I'll just stop sharing here. And I know that we've got some questions that were sent in earlier.
That was amazing. And we've got a couple of questions from you guys. You send it to us. So the first thing they are asking about the black shading. What's the best protocols for setting up the black balance? And what's the maximum temperature you can set up the temperature, and to what was the implications of having the temperature at that level?
Okay, so best protocols for black shading. Black shading is there to ensure clean and consistent pixel sensitivity across the image and to map out any fixed pattern noise that can kind of occur. So in terms of setting one up, you should be considering black shading depending on the environment and the exposure time that you're using. So let's say we're shooting in an interior, lovely air conditioned out there in Dubai. We want to let the camera get up to temperature. So leave it on for a few minutes, adjust to its surroundings, and then black shade for that temperature. Yeah. If we then go outside, and chances are there's going to be around more than a 10-degree difference. So if there's a 10-degree difference in the camera's surroundings or a 10-degree difference internally, that's where the camera will start to say, hey, consider doing a black shade. So if you've got a drastic change in temperature, that's when you should consider redoing one. And on Monstro, Helium, and Gemini, it takes about 5 to 7 minutes. So you'll be using a manual black shade for that. Yeah. In terms of the maximum operating temperature or the highest target temperature you can set, that's 48 degrees is the highest. So if you're shooting in a really hot environment, it's definitely worth upping your target temperature, because there's no chance you're going to be achieving a 20-degree internal temperature. The fans will be on constantly and working really hard to drive it down. So I've seen a lot of people, when they work in really hot environments, upping that target temperature, because the camera is going to get to that temperature anyway, and there's no point just having the fans constantly working to try and achieve an unrealistic temperature. So that's kind of what I would look at in terms of black shading, and when. In terms of exposure, if you're going from, say, 25 FPS to 1 FPS, I would consider doing one. Or if you're going from 8K to 2K 240 FPS. It's a drastic change in your exposure time. And just to ensure that you've got a really clean, consistent pixel sensitivity, that's when I do one. But if you're going from 8K 25 to 6K 96, I wouldn't think about doing it. It's just if you're on the either edge of that really vast spectrum of exposure.
Yeah. And the second one about the dusty environment. So are there specific areas the camera should be protected? And are there tips for cleaning the camera in the field?
Okay, so in terms of protecting it, obviously we've got the intake on the top of the camera on Ranger and DSMC2. Now, obviously obstructing it is going to restrict airflow going through the camera. But if you're in a situation, I've been in loads of situations where we've had explosions going off. We've got debris and shrapnel coming down the body. I've typically used a poly bag. I'll put it over the camera, give it enough room to breathe. I'll get the shot, but then I will take the camera out after the shot, let it cool down, because it's going to be recirculating hot air. I've seen some people use dust filters. So if they're shooting in really sandy or dusty environments, they put a dust filter over the top of the camera. This will restrict airflow, so you really should consider and watch your temperatures and black shade once it's got up to temperature. In terms of cleaning it, what I've always done on set is just got some compressed air through a compressor, not with the ones in a can. I'll then just blow that through the top fans, and that usually gets any dust or debris out of the system.
Yeah. The next one for the OLPF, what's the advantages of skin tones versus the standard for bright environments, and what is the recommended filter for the desert?
Okay, so the OLPFs in DSMC2 are mostly IR cutting and absorbing filters with various levels of anti-reflective coatings. The skin tone highlight is the best for color accuracy and skin tones. Skin tone highlight, it's there to retain as much detail in the highlights as possible. The standard will give you a bit of both. So it'll give you really nice color reproduction and really nice highlight detail, but also it'll do reasonably well in the shadows as well. The low light one starts to come in where it allows the least IR into the image, and you've got the most amount of light blocking, but it's really designed for those higher ISOs. So in terms of the ones that I really like to use, I pretty much just bounce between the standard and the highlight when I'm shooting outside, because the difference in how the image is being transmitted through to the sensor with the skin tone OLPF is really beautiful. Obviously, I'd always suggest doing some tests, but the main differences between standard and skin tone is just the ability to get as much light transmission coming through to get those really accurate colors. And as a result, sometimes with the low light OLPF, you may see a bit of internal reflections. So some people may notice some of that orbing. If you're getting that, the highlight OLPF will get rid of most of that.
Yeah. The next one is Red ProRes. What is the possibility to use it as a principal format if RAW isn't required?
So I mean, I would always prefer to shoot with RAW. It gives us the most amount of flexibility, but I do understand that sometimes people may want to do a really quick turnaround. So if you want to shoot just ProRes, a couple of things to consider. At 4K, you can only go up to 422. In 2K, you can go up to 444. You're going to have obviously your log image burnt in, so you're really going to want to ensure that the details that you want either in the highlights or in the shadows are there. So using the exposure tools in camera is going to be very vital to ensuring the image is exposed correctly. If you go into the false color modes, there is the exposure mode and the geoscope. Those two are going to be your lifesavers to ensure your image is correctly exposed. And then in terms of setting up the camera, when you go to format a card, ensure you format it using UDF. Because in FAT32 mode, it restricts the files to 4 GB segments, so it will segment your ProRes clip. But if you do it in UDF mode, if you shoot for 20 minutes, you'll have a 20-minute single clip. It won't segment it. Apart from that, ensure that your card is on the latest firmware to work with UDF. But apart from that, it's just to make sure it's exposed correctly and you're shooting in UDF.
Yeah. The next one for the ISO, what is the recommendation for ISO settings and best practice for that?
So recommended settings. So because ISO is not burnt in, you've got that flexibility, as we saw earlier, to completely change it. I will typically, as a base, start with ISO 800. That gives me the, not best, but the most evenly distributed dynamic range for the highlights and the shadows. So 800 is where I will start. If I'm going into a very bright environment, I will actually increase my ISO and either ND the lens or actually stop the lens down. Because basically when we're boosting the ISO, we're shifting that dynamic range and actually moving it up. So when you're at like ISO 1600, we've shifted it and we've actually got a little bit more retention there in the highlights.
Yeah.
Vice versa, when you're working in very low light environments, I will shift that ISO down maybe to a 640 or to a 320 if I'm being particularly crazy, and open up the lens or get more light into the scene. And that's where you're basically going to get that thickest digital negative. Obviously, the common thought process is it's getting dark, I'll boost my ISO. If there's no information there, there's no information there. It's always about getting the cleanest image and working with that dynamic range to distribute it where you kind of see fit. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say for that.
And the next one for the crop factor and the high speed. So could you explain when using the high speed, how the camera crops in for the specific speed, and even when it's says the full frame, for example, the 3K full frame?
Okay, so to basically achieve the higher frame rates on DSM-C2 and Ranger, we're basically cropping off pixels. So when you go from 8K down to 4K, you'll see a cropping. We're basically masking off pixels to achieve that higher data rate. On red.com, there's a tools section where you can check what the crop factor is. As a result, your 50mm lens may become 100mm depending on the crop factor you use. In terms of what it means by 3K full frame, that's just in terms of so 4K is 4096 by 2160. That's just the terminology that we've used to indicate, hey, this is the full 4K frame or full 3K frame. So it doesn't mean we're shooting the full VistaVision sensor. It just means that in terms of the actual aspect ratio and resolution, that it's the full res there.
Yeah. And what is the limitation of crop from the image quality point of view, when you're matching shots? For example, for 2K high speed, cutting well with the 8K footage with the delivery 4K.
I mean, it's definitely doable, and I see lots of people do it. It's just one of those things to consider. You know, if you really want that high speed, making sure you've got good lenses for a starting point to make sure that any softening isn't going to be emphasized through punching in on that image circle. In terms of considerations, color reproduction, it's still going to be the same. It's still the same photo sites. It's just that we're kind of blowing them up to go to 4K. So just ensuring that the image is well exposed, because anything that starts to get a bit noisy is just going to be enhanced if you're shooting in low light. So just make sure you're getting enough light through those pixels, basically.
Yeah. And the last one for the LUTs, what is the advantage versus a disadvantage for the raw negative? Should you shoot for the LUT or shoot for the fat negativity?
I would always shoot for the fat negative. So a lookup table is kind of just giving us a starting point for how the image is going to look. You know, when I'm working on set, the LUT is used to give the director and the producers a sense for how the scene will be feeling tonally. I wouldn't be using that to base my exposure off. I will always want to ensure my highlights, my shadows, and my skin tones are being exposed correctly. So using the geoscope, we've got some articles on red.com explain the geoscope. That's really going to show you where that highlight detail is, where the shadows are being kind of worked with the noise profile. So I wouldn't be exposing off the LUT. It's great to be able to see, hey, you know, the art direction and the costume is getting the color reproduction that I want, but I won't be using that for exposure. Always make sure your log and your raw is exposed correctly.
Yeah. So let me check if we've got any questions in the YouTube.
Perfect.
I think we haven't got anything, but guys, if you have any question, please feel free to send it to us. And it was really a privilege to have you, Jonny. And
thank you for having me. I love being here. Hopefully, I can come back to Dubai very soon.
Sure, inshallah, very soon. Okay, guys, thank you for your watching, and keep tuning for more videos. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.